In ASP.NET Dependency Injection, we have three lifetimes: singleton, scope service, and transient. Singleton is for entire application. When you register it, DI will create one instance for your entire application lifetime. Transient, every time that you inject that service, it will create new instance. And the scope service, it will create per request. Wait, per request? Well, yes and no. I'm Said. In this video, I'm going to show you how it works in real-world applications. Here, I have a Web API project. So let's create three classes for three lifetime. I'm going to show you one by one and how they are creating by dependency injection. Okay, let's add one, for example, DI services. Remember, it's not required to have an interface for using dependency injection. I mean, it's not required to have one interface and one implementation. So here I'm going to use directly a class as those services. Let's name the first one singleton. And I'm going to add only the constructor. Okay, and here in constructor, I'm going to put this log to see when they are creating, because once the DI wants to create new instance of that service, it will run the constructor. Yep. So here, if I have the log, every time I can see when they are instantiate. Singleton, okay, it's enough. And here I'm going to add a new GUID. Okay, so let's create another one for scope services. Scope, and the final one is transient. And also let's change the name in the log. And here is scoped. Fine. Now we have three services. Let's add them to the DI. I can add them here. Builder services, add singleton. Singleton service. Another one. Let's just copy this one. Is scoped. And transient. Okay, and for sure we need to change this one as well. Fine. Now we have them in our DI. So for using them, I need to add or inject them into our controller constructor. So let's start with singleton one. And also another one. Here I can add them to the constructor. And I always like to order constructor parameter like this. Okay, fine. Now we have all of those services into one constructor. It means DI will create one instance from them. Just let's run the application. Okay, it's run. And here is our Swagger page. And in the log, you can see that there is no logs because dependency injection, once you call the controller or the API, the ASP.NET pipeline will instantiate the controller. It will create one instance of your controller. So at that time, the constructor of the controller will be executed and DI will inject and create instance of those services for us. Okay, it means if now I call the API here, I can see these logs here for the singleton, for a scope and transient. Okay, fine. Now we know that it works. Every time that dependency injection try to create one instance, we can see the log here. Then let's add another service here for using those services. Just for showing the case, imagine that you have another service in your another layers, and then we can use these services. So let's call it data service, for example. And here I'm going to add these three as well in this class and add them in the constructor. Generic, okay. This one and fine. Okay, that's enough. And now we need to add this data series into the DI as well as a add scope. Doesn't matter here. So for sure we need to add it here to instantiate that class data series. So remember, we have these three in the one class, controller, and another one in data service. Based on this singleton, scope, and transient, we can see the difference. Let's just run the project again. Okay. If I call the API, you can see singleton object will instantiate once, but it didn't create it again. It means the DI create one instance, it will use or reuse for all of our services. So in this case, the data service is using singleton, but same object. You can see there is no object creation. And also for a scope, because we are in same request, didn't create another one. But for transient, as I said, transient, every time that you inject the transient class in the new service, it will create new instance. And in this case, as we can see, there is two different transient object. It means the constructor of the transient ran twice. Okay, but now the point is for the scope. Now we can see, okay, because this is one request, it used the or reuse the same instance. But what now if I add another interface, which is a built-in scope factory? This interface is exactly came for creating scope in the ASP.NET. Okay, so if I just add it to the constructor, and if simply just put a method here, do something for me, I'm gonna create new scope by using this services scope factory and create scope. And here I can get the service from get required service. And if I put scope service here, we are in the same request still. But let's see, we are create another scope, and in this scope we will try to get new instance or try to get the scope service from DI. Let's see. I'm gonna put a breakpoint here just for checking the code. I'm gonna run the project because I didn't call the method, it wasn't hit. Let me just call the method here, data service, do something. Run again. Fine. Call the API, and here is the breakpoint. Let's check the log. 1 singleton, a scope service, and 2 transient services, which is fine. We know that. And if I get another instance of the scope service, here you can see the constructor of the scope service is run. It means it is the new instance of the scope service. Let's try to get the singleton one. This should be the same instance because this is singleton. Every time that we ask DI to get a new instance, it will return the same object for us. So let's just check it again. You see, it's actually this line executed, and there is no new object for the singleton. But for a scope service, there is new one, right? So a scope services is per scope, not per request. But actually, when anyone says scope services is per request, is partially true. Why? Because in the ASP.NET pipeline, when we have a new request in our pipeline, it will create a scope for that request. It's very easy to handle those objects for the ASP.NET runtime to dispose the scope services. And it's true that a scope services is created by the request for the request scope, but we can create new scope and get new instance from DI. Maybe you ask, what's the point? The point is, every time that you are writing your code, your logic for the scope services, you need to keep in mind that maybe you are relying on the code that it will execute it once per request. And you are caching something, or you are referring to some properties on your class. But you need to keep in mind that maybe a new developer or new joiners to your project, it will use this service scope factory in other part of the application and get new instance of the scope service. So that's it. If you like this content, please make sure you're subscribed. Thank you for your time. Bye.